For fear of repercussions and misrepresentations, the organizers of the Pegida marches usually tell their attendants not to speak to the media. As a consequence, these organizers have been called anti-freedom of the press and also anti-democratic. To disprove these concerns, the magazine Kontraste, broadcast by ARD, which is one of the largest broadcasters in the world and certainly the largest broadcaster in this country, had spoken to those who were present, and they asked them for their thoughts about the murder of Walter Lübcke. If you had watched my recent videos, you probably remember that Walter Lübcke is a local politician who was shot in the face. The motivation of the attacker was probably that he called for Germans to leave the country if they do not like the asylum politics and the so-called values associated with it. Lorenz Haase, the Attorney General of the city of Dresden, looked into the books to find laws to abuse against those who dared to speak to the media. He found 3. One was already filed officially. That is the appreciation of a crime. I will go through these different laws in a second. So the first is this appreciation of a crime, which is already filed. Then he is still looking into a possibility of incitement to hatred. And the third is the dishonoring of a dead person. Now have a look at the original footage because it's all just about a sequence of words broadcast over the media, and so we can go through the paragraphs and through the case step by step. Have a look.
Der ARD Kontraste heute mit der Kamera rumlungen.
Im Vergleich zur linksextremen Gefahr ist ein Mord, was weiß ich, alle 2-3 Jahre aus irgendwelchen Hassgründen relativ normal.
Ich sehe den Herrn Lübcke als Volksverräter. Wer seinem eigenen Volk empfiehlt, auszureisen, wenn ihm die Flüchtlingspolitik nicht passt, das ist für mich ein Volksverräter.
Dann ist das ja eigentlich bald eine menschliche Reaktion.
Der Mord ist eine menschliche Reaktion?
Wie es in den Wald reingerufen wird, so schallt es wieder raus.
Bringt von Linken mal was im Fernsehen, das sind die Verbrecher, aber das macht er ja nicht.
Ich muss mich bei Frau Merkel bedanken wegen Lübcke. Sie hat doch den Hass auf die Politiker geschürt. Ja, sie hat das zu verantworten.
This was the footage that I saw in one video, but I've also seen another video about the same incidents, and it may be that the attorney has some additional footage that I have not seen. In the one that I remember, a reporter asks one man what his reason is to charge the murder of Walter Lübcke differently as a murder of some German by an asylum seeker. And the man says this is essentially a man bites dog story. It's not exactly his words, but that's what he meant. It's an exception. While the other situation, an immigrant killing a German, is a daily occurrence. I'm mentioning this because that can indeed be persecuted as incitement to hatred, because German courts do not care about whether something is true. Akif Pirinci had a number of trials about his supposed insults and incitement to hatred and to God knows what. And the judges have regularly told him that it does not matter whether the things he says are actually true or not. There are other principles at play, and in this case, it may be that you cannot generalize over certain groups, and it must be some groups. It's not every group. You can most certainly speak about rabbis as you want. For example, you can say they are supporting a hostile, evil, demonic sort of God that was just replaced by a more, a decent, lovely, hug everybody God in the Gospels. So you can demonize over all rabbis as you please, but you can of course not speak negatively about Muslims or about immigrants. So that's a different story entirely. and if he suggests that a crime on the scale of a murder is something that occurs every single day, he doesn't even get the chance to validate that. He could go into the prison statistics and see how many people from migration background or whose fathers and mothers have been immigrants or who are immigrants themselves are murders of other people, and see how that fits into a calendar. But that is not a chance that is usually given to a defendant at the court. So here is one case where Mr. Haase, the general attorney of Dresden, can get active. So now let's go through the other incidents that you have just seen. The first man says that he would say this kind of murder is kind of normal, human is his exact word. So he has some understanding of the crime, and indeed there is a law that calls for the citizens not to show understanding for a crime, and that is quite peculiar. It has the same rubber phrase in it that you also find in the law against incitement of hatred and also in the blasphemy law, and that is if what you say is arousing the public. So the law does not say you can or cannot do this or that. It says once the public gets aroused, your action is being punished. So it is a mob rule that is part of the general penalty code, and it's not just this law, it is a multitude of laws, as I just mentioned. There's the same problem like with all these anti-speech laws. They are all against the Declaration of Human Rights, particularly the freedom of speech, but in this case also the freedom of conscience. Sometimes you may feel that a criminal act, even though it's against the law, may not bother you emotionally, because morals also have an emotional dimension. And if you approve of something, as long as you don't tell people to do something, that is actually okay legally from an international law perspective, obviously not from a national law perspective. The punishment for appreciation or approval or acceptance, actually the word means acceptance, so it's not cheering, it is more tame. Acceptance of a crime comes with a penalty of up to 3 years in prison or a financial fine. Then there's the man who says what comes around goes around, and that this murder is understandable, or is human, as he calls it. The first thing to note here is that there are some editing issues. He starts the exchange with "then." It is a human reaction. So he was kind of tricked into saying what he had to say. Then there's a second editing issue. The German video is captioned, and when he says what comes around goes around in reaction to you think a murder is human, it prefaces his statement with yes, and this yes, ja, is not said yet again.
Reaktion.
Der Mord ist eine menschliche Reaktion?
Wie es in den Wald reingerufen wird, so schallt es wieder raus.
Quite frankly, I can't imagine that anything can be found to get this woman harassed. It just says bring some stories about the left. There's no way in hell that this can be used against her. And the last man is the one who says that it is the responsibility of Angela Merkel that the political climate is as it is. That aside, I also don't see how somebody can go after him. But there are two more laws, and The first incitement to hatred is, as I said, only applicable to this one case that is not in this one video that I just showed you, but that I have noticed still. And the second one is that you cannot speak negatively about a dead person. Interesting about that law is that it is somewhat between civil law and penal code law. What do you say? Strafrecht and high crime law. So here you don't have a law that's just applied to everybody, but this punishment is just doled out if you dare to smear or to speak negatively about a person whose relatives and loved ones may bring it to the attention of the authorities. So Germany is still in the denunciation legal system, and it resembles the Sharia. In Islamic law, you can also put off a murder inquisition if maybe your son is homosexual or whatever. You can say, well, you stop, dear police, we don't need your investigation anymore. So the crime really is only relevant if your loved ones care about it well enough. And that's why we also see a lot of problems with honor killings in the Islamic world. But the German penalty code has some sides that are very similar, and as a consequence, our law is somewhat in between of this primitive Muslim laws and the modern English, the modern laws of the English world or of the free world. That's interesting about that law. But that means that the attorney actually has to get the relatives of Walter Lübcke behind him to go after these individuals. What we see here is that the law is not applied equally, and that is why I'm making this video. Outside of these poor people who are in the crosshairs and who may be punished for what they have told to the media, and also to warn everybody to speak to these people, because no matter how much they say, we are not your enemies, we're not the enemies of the people, don't smear us, they will do everything in their power to get you destroyed, to destroy your life. They hate you, so that's the warning. But outside of that, why I'm doing this is to speak about a broader issue, so that other nations that have not gone down the drain as far as we have can take precautions against it. And that is, in Germany, we have a very weak equality before the law application. Basically, what that means is we have a bench in law. This Attorney General, Mr. Haase, can look into the books to select a group and punish him just as he pleases, and this makes the entire legal system a political weapon against disliked groups. If you ever wondered how it came to the Holocaust, that is, one stepstone to it. First, you disadvantaged the Jews, and then you dehumanize them, you demonize them, and the consequences of being punished for minor things while everybody else gets away with everything, psychologically and in all other areas, just simply leads to you being ostracized in one way or another, and that leads to other problems in the group, and to an estrangement between the different portions of society in the long run. So I'm speaking now, of course, not the run up to the Third Reich, but in the long run, anti-Semitism really devolved from excluding people ever more from participation, demonizing them, and the first step really is to give some group of people less rights than anybody else, or rather apply the law that seems to be for everybody differently to different people. That's also a standard tactic against Israel, of course. And at the same time, we see that crimes that have been committed by left-wingers, like recently this Captain Carola Rackete, are not persecuted. The Italian judge has now released her from captivity. She is she is so brash. She asks the media to denounce our government that had already spoken up internationally for everybody to see against the Italians for not doing enough to get her out of her trouble for breaking the law. And while everybody is watching the law being ignored and criminals being rewarded, another ship is already on the way looking for a harbor to drop some illegal immigrants. And this will attract ever more. I think Lampedusa has now seen a second ship since this incident with Mrs. Rackete. Rackete. And the situation is it will just go on. The illegal practice will go on because they have this backing of the authorities. And if the authorities decide that laws don't play a role anymore and they conventionally decide who's going to be punished and who's going to be rewarded according to our constitution, that means that we are obliged, not free to, but obliged to actually kill everybody who is responsible for that. Now, obviously, I'm not calling for this. And obviously, I do not approve of the murder of Mr. Lübcke. I just say that we have an obligation to do something. And as long as we have peaceful ways to go forward, we must make use of these peaceful ways. But the left must be warned that they have to keep these peaceful ways open, because there is not just a constitutional responsibility, but there's also a moral responsibility. And this is one of the most fundamental laws of the Western nation. It is so old. It is probably even the oldest principle by which the British are governed, and that still sustains the system today. And if the left feels they want to destroy this very principle, they are playing with fire. They are playing with fire. So I hope other nations take precautions so they don't slip into this trap. It is very important. It is not as important as freedom of speech, but it is almost as important as freedom of speech. And you must be careful not to lose it. That was it for today, and I'll see you soon. Bye.